Hello and welcome. I'm Emma Draycott. I am your host and founder of Recharge and Rise, and I am a anti-burnout and anxiety therapist. And I am so excited and blessed today to be joined by Nikki Heyder. She is a psychotherapist, so a holistic psychotherapist. So she's a coach, a yoga teacher, she's a mentor and a published author. And she is so passionate about supporting her students and clients through a compassionate approach. So she's worked with a wide range of people. She specialises in working with women with highly sensitive natures. And she also supports and teachers and mentors other professionals as well in her trauma-informed approaches. So, Nikki, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's really blessed to have this conversation. So, the first thing I would love to invite you to share is, how did you get to where you are now? So, what led you to here doing the work that you do?
Thank you, Emma. Big question, and I'm not going to give you the long story because it's very long. I will give you the short story. So I basically came to be a therapist and work in the space that I do. In a nutshell, because I actually used to work as a clinical nutritionist. So my undergrad is in health science and in clinical nutrition, so nutritional medicine. And I worked for a long time as a nutritionist, and I, not by choice, it just so happened that I ended up specializing in working with women who had eating disorders and disordered eating behaviors. So I worked a lot with people who were either in and out of hospital, or women who were struggling with the binge and purge cycle, who were very controlling around their food, obsessive around their food, had body dysmorphia, and things like that. And basically, as I was working with these women, as a nutritionist, you obviously consult, you prescribe supplements, you look at their diets, you look at their bloods, you do all of these things. But I came to a stage where I felt very limited in my ability to treat and to support, because what actually came to be were these much deeper conversations around shame. I'm like this, or I do this because I don't feel good enough, or I don't feel beautiful enough, or I'm so stressed out that I need something to have control over, or I need a feeling of release and relief because, lo and behold, they don't know how to manage their emotions or their nervous system. So there was something a lot deeper. And I guess that really sparked my interest into initially doing my coaching qualifications, and then doing my postgraduate studies in counseling psychology. And this was all maybe about 6 or 7 years ago now, maybe 7 years ago. And then I live in Bali in Indonesia. So I moved back home. This is where I grew up. I moved back to Bali around 6, 7 years ago when I finished my studies. And I actually did like my initial clinical hours at an drug and alcohol addiction treatment clinic here in Bali, and worked under my clinical supervisor for the next 2 or 3 years, because eating disorders and addiction have very similar root causes of shame, right? It's a behavior, a symptom that we end up taking part in or doing regardless of us knowing that it's not good for us, because it kind of resolves or solves something for us very much internally. So I did my time there, and actually while I was there, my clinical supervisor was the first one that said to me, have you ever explored compassion-focused therapy? And I said, no, why? And he said, you're just a natural compassion-focused therapist. It's just like it's just the way that you are. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. I've never really looked at it. And that kind of led me then onto my journey to do further training and professional development in Buddhist psychology. I did my 240 hours with Dr. Gabor Mate in his compassionate inquiry practitioner training, and have done, a lot of trauma-informed work with some incredible leaders in their fields, all around safe and compassionate space holding. I'm also a yoga teacher, as you mentioned, and I've been doing that for about 10 years. So that's also a big part of yoga philosophy, is meeting ourselves where we're at, and finding that compassionate approach to ourselves. So it's very much what I teach in my sessions, on the yoga mat, in my, groups and cohorts, in all aspects of what I do.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It's something I really strongly relate to, and with the clients that I work with is, the eating or the addiction or the cycles of behavior are the symptom, aren't they? But actually, like you say, the root cause of that, there's often very similar root causes to that. It's just how we manage them. They are different, and how they come out in our behaviors are different. So tell me, I'd love to know a little bit more about what you find in terms of the patterns of the root causes and what actually helps people to move forward from the symptoms that they're coming with.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I find that for a lot of people, how shame shows up is very, like, people don't realize that what they're experiencing is shame, so we all have these, what we might call, limiting beliefs, which I'm sure, many people who are watching have these feelings of, I'm not, like I said, I'm not good enough, I'm too much, I'm an inconvenience, I'm a burden, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not smart enough, imposter syndrome, I'm a fraud, there are so many. There are so many that people have, and I'm sure people who are watching this right now can already identify a couple of them. And ultimately, the feeling of shame is this idea that I am, like, inherently broken. I'm wrong or flawed or bad in some way, and so I need to strive to somehow deal with that pain. So if initially the pain I feel of, like, what's wrong with me, and then secondly, if something's wrong with me, then how do I get to be loved and accepted by society? Who do I need to become in order to have other people like me and love me? And so that's where we see different patterns and behaviors arise. And some of those patterns and behaviors could be self-harming patterns and behaviors, because it's dealing with the pain of not belonging or feeling different or whatever it might be. Or it could be patterns and behaviors such as fawning, people pleasing, perfectionism, overachieving. You mentioned burnout, right? What leads us to burning out? Like that whole, I have to be better, I have to do more, I have to keep going, I have to prove and prove and prove. Because there's a fundamental belief underneath all of that, like, why do you need to prove yourself? Because I don't feel like I'm worthy as I am. I'm not of value as I am. So I need to make other people happy. I need to suppress myself and my authenticity. I need to put on a mask, or I need to constantly be busying myself so that others can see that I offer value.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that hits hard, because I know how much that, for people that I work with and my own experiences in life, actually, that not feeling good enough, the shame. It's interesting. Thank you so much for sharing some language around shame, because I do believe that, many people may not relate those words with the feeling of shame. And I know then, actually, how you just described, there is layering, isn't there, of getting further and further away from yourself to fit in, to be good enough. And also, many of us live in societies where we're rewarded for certain types of behaviour, for being a good girl, for doing well, and those types of things. But so we are constantly taught who we should be, but we lose sense of who we are, who we actually are. How do you support people to reconnect with who they are? Because I know you use so many modalities, and if there's any wisdom that you can share where you feel like people are able to do this for themselves,
Absolutely.
love to know.
Yeah, I just wrote down a couple of things as you were talking, and I just feel a couple of things are really important. One thing being the cyclical nature of shame. So how a lot of people, the shame gets bigger and bigger, basically, the more that we don't speak about it. And then the more we engage in behaviors and patterns, that we then feel guilty about or shameful about, it adds more layers onto those layers, and it makes the shame bigger. So it gives our brains more evidence as to why we are bad or wrong. So say if I'm working with someone who, has addictive tendencies, for example, every time they engage in doing something that they know is bad or wrong for them, it confirms the belief that they're bad or wrong. And so they stay in this place. And it's really interesting to watch that behavior. And when people can step away from themselves, they can see like, wow, I feel this, but I'm actually creating more of this for myself, which is interesting. And then you mentioned societal expectations, which I think is a really important thing for people to realize, that a lot of these shame stories or narratives that we carry, most of the time they're formed in childhood. And there's a very good reason for that. It's not always that our parents are bad or wrong. In some cases, our parents were not kind and they were not attuned, and we did experience relational trauma. In other instances, it may have been that we had loving parents who were also very busy, or loving parents who also didn't know how to regulate their emotions. And a child's brain makes meaning of those situations. And once again, they're trying to fit in and adapt. So a lot of these beliefs were formed in our very formative years when our brain is still very much developing, and they become our I am statements. So as children, we're learning, well, who am I and where do I belong and what's my sense of self? And so we come up with these statements that help us to fit into our home environment. But what we know about, obviously, neuroscience and the neural pathways of our brain is that the more that's repeated, the stronger it gets, especially when it's in relation to a sense of me, the strongest kind of thing that our brain actually remembers. And I was reading about this the other day. I was reading a book by James Doty, who's a neuroscientist, and he was saying, when you're at a party and it's really loud and you can't hear anything, but then someone calls your name from across the room and you turn and you hear it immediately, it's because your name and your association with me is the strongest thing in your brain. And he was saying how our I am statements have that same very strong neural connection in our brains, which is why these beliefs are so hard to break. So I thought I'd share that just for context for the listeners, because they might find that interesting.
Yeah.
When it comes to how to work with them, how to work with it, a big part of my philosophy through a compassion-focused approach is don't make yourself bad or wrong. Don't make yourself bad or wrong for having a behavior that you're not proud of, or for, being in a relationship where it's not equal, or it's toxic in some way. Or don't make yourself bad or wrong for having a loud inner critic. Like, don't make yourself bad or wrong. It's important to know that everything happens, and everything we think and everything we do, it's all there for a reason. And usually it's a reason of learned behavior through an intention of wanting to survive and belong, which is our core human need, is to be in connection, to belong, and to have community. I mean, we're still mammals at the end of the day. We want to belong to one another. So I would say that's step one. Like, don't look at yourself and look at your patterns and look at your behaviors and say, what's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you. I don't believe that anything is ever wrong with any of my clients. I never believe that they are there to be fixed. I never believe that they are broken. I just believe that they are acting in a way which makes perfect sense. And we'll figure that out. We'll get to why. And then when we get to why, it's a matter of becoming aware of our patterns and behaviors, becoming aware of where they stemmed from, and then actively choosing to tell ourselves a different narrative, to work on our nervous system, to help ourselves to regulate, to make choices that, albeit being hard choices, are choices that honor the version of us that we actually want to be, and to slowly start to build up a deeper sense of self-trust and self-connection, self-belonging, self-love, and all of these things. And it's not an overnight process. It's something that takes a long time, unfortunately.
We've had many years, people have had many years, haven't they, of those experiences. And I absolutely loved when you said that, actually really we are perfect, and it makes perfect sense. And often when I support clients too, understand their own experiences. And I often go on the approach of, what led you here? Not right now in this conversation, but in life. There
Mm,
were building blocks of your life that led to today, and that is
mm,
understandable. And actually, like you said, a lot of the time it is to do with survival. It's about your brain doing the thing that it thinks is best for you, and
mm,
trying to cope in the best way possible. Okay,
mm,
so thank you so much for sharing that. Another thing that I know that we wanted to talk about is about being highly sensitive.
mm,
So I'd love to ask, what does that actually mean? And how,
mhm,
how do we develop that, or where does it come from in your view?
mm,
And I know that you work, you specialize with working with highly sensitive people. So
mm.
actually, that was more than two questions. So I will
Okay.
follow on those. So,
I'll do my best. So what is highly sensitive? So being highly sensitive, it's also known as sensory processing sensitivity. And basically it is, I mean, what we know now is that for many of us, it affects about 20 to 25% of the population. And it is a genetic, there are actually, I think it's 5 different genes within our system that basically create a more sensitive nervous system and a more sensitive sensory experience of the world. So once again, this doesn't mean that something's wrong with you. It's your own version or a different version of what someone else might be like. And it doesn't mean that you're faulty or flawed. You're just more sensitive. And the interesting thing about society, and probably our parents and generations before, is that sensitivity is often seen as a weakness. Sensitivity is often seen as an inconvenience and something that is bad. And so when someone says, oh, I'm not highly sensitive, they don't want to admit that part of them. But actually being highly sensitive is an incredibly powerful and wonderful way to relate to the world. And we have so much to teach people when we are highly sensitive, because we see the world in a fundamentally very different way. So some ways to know that you're highly sensitive is to just ask yourself, how do you experience the world through your senses as well as your emotions? So for example, highly sensitive people have sensory profiles which may differ from one person to another, but generally speaking, there will be at least a couple of senses that are incredibly much more heightened than other people. So for some people, they might have a really sensitive sense of sound. So, when they hear something loud, it literally jolts their entire nervous system. They can't be in loud places. Being in crowds makes them feel really anxious. They really need to be in silence, for example, in order to recuperate and recharge. Others might have sensitivity to light, so they find it really hard to be in shopping malls or in doctors' surgeries or hospitals and places like that where they have that really white light. It can immediately trigger migraines and headaches and make them feel really sensitive. For others, it can be a sense of touch. We see this a lot with children who get really irritable with the tags and the types of clothes that they wear, and just like anything that's on their body that is not the right type of material can be really irritable to them, to the point that it sends their nervous system into a frenzy. From an emotional perspective, we're deeply emotional, meaning that we're more sensitive to the way that we experience emotion. So we might feel sadness more than another person, but we will also feel joy more than another person. So both ends of the spectrum, we feel more intensely. We're also a lot more sensitive to other people's emotions. So we have a much greater sense of empathy, and our ability to quite literally feel what someone else is feeling is one of the main, common characteristics of it. So a lot of the time, highly sensitive people struggle to watch certain types of movies. For example, they struggle to watch the news. Things can really have a deeply emotional experience for them. And once again, I'm just saying that this is how a lot of us will experience it. It can also be sometimes interrelated with or misdiagnosed sometimes with sometimes ADD and ADHD, because being highly sensitive, we can tend to want to distract ourselves from whatever it is that is causing us to feel uncomfortable, and that can be often misdiagnosed as being having attention deficiency disorder. So that's also an interesting thing to note, that it might not actually be that, and it might just be that we haven't learned how to handle and deal with our sensitive nature, because for many of us, we grow up believing that it's bad or wrong, that we can't be sensitive, and people don't get us. We often feel misunderstood. And when we're misunderstood, once again, as children, we go, well, if they don't understand me, then am I not making sense? Like, what's wrong with me? And we internalize it and make it about us. So in my instance, for example, I'm a highly sensitive person, was a highly sensitive child, and my sensitivity was often put down, mocked, bullied, by my dad, my sister, and I very quickly learned how to not show my sensitivity. I mean, I have a great relationship with both of them now, but my sensitivity was very confronting for them when I was younger, and they didn't know how to deal with it. And so I learned that I was an inconvenience, that I had to be quiet, that I shouldn't really speak up, and developed people-pleasing tendencies as a result, and really put on a facade for most of my life that I'm fine. I'm always fine, and that was my mask for a very long time. And I would keep everything inside because I didn't dare someone see that I was really sensitive, because, I would lose connection with that person.
So it's that need, going back to what you said earlier, that need for connection, and it's the way that we do that. I'm not asking this because thank you for sharing that personal story. I'm asking this question, but it doesn't have to be personal to you. But I'd love to know how that affects people. So, hiding, putting on a front, the mask, and holding things in, the impact of that, and then what we often see as therapists, because I see this a lot, how it actually comes up to the surface and impacts people.
It's so interesting because we don't realize that we're doing it, and this is, once again, for anyone watching, you're not bad or wrong. You don't realize that you're doing this. I didn't realize I was doing it until, it's not like you can't, it's not until you see something that you can't unsee it, and it's not until we know things about ourselves that we go, oh, that's why I do this. Like, otherwise, what's that famous quote by Carl Jung? Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your life and you will call it fate, right? So this is how most of us are operating. And basically, so if we're kind of taking a bird's eye view of it and looking at it like a system, there's the authentic nature. Let's call it your authentic nature. There's the original. Sorry if you can hear my child. Can you hear my child? He's okay. Sorry, everyone watching. I have a 2-year-old. So he might be screaming in the background somewhere. So we have our authentic nature, which in this instance, if we're using sensitivity as an example, your sensitivity, your sensitive nature, both the positive and the negative, if you want to see it as a negative, that is who you authentically are. And then that authentic nature is placed into an environment where it's either nurtured and you thrive because you are put into an environment where people see your sensitivity as a gift and they work towards helping you to cultivate it and to empower you with it. One of these ways can be through creative pursuits, for example. In a lot of instances, though, and for what you and I would see a lot, is where this sensitivity is put into an environment where it's not understood and not attuned to, meaning it's not the needs of that child possibly are not met in a way that they would like them to be or need them to be. And then we develop the I'm not good enough statements, and then we ask ourselves, okay, well, not literally, but this is what happens as a process. Like, how do I need to behave? Who do I need to be in order to maintain attachment? And in most instances, we will forego our authenticity in favor of attachment. So we'll say, okay, well, I seem to get attention when I achieve something, or when I come home with an award, I feel like mommy and daddy really love me. Or when I'm not crying, I get da 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 da. Or so we're always seeking, like, who do I need to be? How do I need to stay safe? How do I need to act? And then we fast forward into adulthood, and the accumulation of all these things have basically led us into situations where maybe we don't have any boundaries. For example, if we're people pleasing, right, we have no boundaries. So we might see ourselves in relationships that we don't want to be in. We might find ourselves in toxic relationship dynamics. We might not know how to say no to our boss because they keep giving us work, and we feel bad if we say no, because what if we say no and then they won't want us and we're going to get fired and all these things because we're not good enough. So that's one of the ways that we may see it come up, is boundaries. Another way we might see it is overachieving, so constantly being busy. And I don't know how many people watching this feel really uncomfortable when they're still. So the perfectionistic nature of being stuck in that hypervigilance, our nervous system state being on high alert all the time. Who do I need to be? What do I need to be doing? How do I need to prove myself? That then translates into adulthood as women who just don't know when to stop. And this was me for a very long time, you know? You get up at 6 and you don't slow down until you go to bed at night. And maybe you need 2 glasses of red wine to calm your nervous system down to actually go to sleep. But then that results in burnout, and it results in high irritability, and we're snapping at our partner and snapping at our children and taking on more than we can handle, and then we're getting sick and we've got the flu all the time, and all of these things are compounding, and we're feeling completely overwhelmed. So it can come up as panic attacks, anxiety, all of these types of feelings. One of the most common things that I see is when we start doing the work, is when my clients realize I'm just not living a life that is in alignment to what I actually value. And that's one of the biggest things, is when someone pauses and goes, actually, I don't want any of this, or I don't like any of this. Like, what am I doing here? And this is like a really confronting moment for a lot of people, but it's the biggest indicator that we've been living our lives in accordance to what we think we should be doing and not what we actually want to be doing. And we end up accumulating or going and studying something or having this job or doing whatever, and we're like, I don't actually like this, you know. And and we need to start to unravel that and connect back to what is really meaningful for us, and learn a lot of these skills and behaviors that we never learned, we were never taught. So once again, you're not bad or wrong, it's just that we don't have the skills, we didn't learn the skills, and so now we have to. You know, I have such a big history of people pleasing and getting into all sorts of, you know, situations that were not in alignment to my value, just because I was so scared of making somebody else upset.
Yeah. And it's very powerful, that motivation behind that, isn't it, as well? Yeah. And as she was talking then, so I'd love to go back to the conversation around busy, but also, yeah, we'll go there. So when I recognise a lot for women that are very busy and overworking, feel responsible for so many different things, and I often support women that are almost like at the top of that hierarchy of, they support everybody else, like in their community, maybe children, etc., but they don't necessarily have that person for them anymore. Or maybe, like you were just saying, that actually the person that they did have didn't quite understand them or meet their needs, not because of any ill intent. So they develop these behaviours and actually are running on, we'll just call it busy because I think it's just easier for people to understand. And actually they find it very, very difficult to calm down. And I will always share my own story and say, you know, the idea of yoga to me years ago was literally painful, not because of the exercise, but literally to sit in stillness was so confronting that I almost felt like I needed to rock. Like I was like, this is awful. Yes. But now I go, I enjoy stillness, I enjoy meditation and yoga. So there is a way to there. But I'd love your insights of why it is that it is so hard to then relax, even when women are wanting to. So they're like, I'm going to carve some time out to relax, but actually that's so difficult for them. And what are the steps to start to get to that place?
Yeah, great question. Something that I always like to say to my clients when we're talking about the nervous system, which is what this involves, is I say to them, I need you to remember that your nervous system is designed to keep you safe and not happy. It's not meant to make you happy, it's meant to keep you safe. So it will do whatever it needs to do in order to prioritize your safety. And we can have nervous systems that get, for lack of a better word, stuck in a particular state. And being busy is usually a nervous system that is stuck in flight mode. So it's in that state of hypervigilance and sympathetic activation, but predominantly in flight. Some of us can be stuck in freeze, where we almost get so in this busy state that we kind of start feeling like robots, and we feel almost numb on the outside, and we're just like going through our daily tasks, feeling completely like numb to ourselves and the world around us. So bearing in mind that the nervous system is designed to keep you safe, and coming back to what we talked about before of the limiting beliefs that we create and where a lot of them can stem from, if I don't feel like I am inherently worthy, if I don't believe in my inherent goodness, if I don't feel like I'm valuable as I am, without doing anything or proving myself to anybody, and I come up with a belief, or I have experiences that when I serve others, when I accomplish university degrees, when I get accolades at work, when I earn a certain amount of money, and once again, this is all reinforced by society, by the way, so it's like, you must be like this. So we then say, okay, so I don't have an inherent sense of worth. I believe I should be like this, and I have some experiences of being like that and feeling connected. My nervous system then goes, okay, I need to start seeking and being like this all the time so that I am safe, so that people see my worth, and that I remain connected to my community, and fundamentally so that I don't die. Like, in very simple nervous system terms, it's so that I don't die, so I remain a part of a pack and a tribe. And what happens over time in the nervous system is the more busy you are, the less you're able to actually activate what we call your vagal brake, which is the part of your nervous system that hits a brake and allows you to engage in your parasympathetic state, which is that state of rest and digest. So we get so accustomed to being in this certain way that it's really difficult, physiologically difficult, for us to actually stop and be like, okay, cool, now I'm going to meditate. Like, now I'm going to go and do yin yoga. The brain's like, what? No, but we're supposed to be doing things. Remember, we're supposed to be continuously being busy, flighting, moving, right? And so when it's wired that way, because it thinks that being that way will keep you safe, being in spaces of stillness is going to make you feel unsafe, right? You're going to feel as though something bad is going to happen, or like you're forgetting to do something, or that, and I used to find this all the time. I used to come into my office and just sit at my desk and like try to find something to do, even though I had nothing to do. And it wasn't actually until I had a child that he quite literally forced me to find more stillness, and to find more presence outside of my usual busy. And I'm very grateful to him for that. But it is not easy, because you're changing your nervous system state, and you're telling it that what it's always done and always thought as a mechanism for survival is actually not true anymore. And then you want to change it to this, and your whole system's going to go like red alert, red alert, red alert. No. And so this is why we can't like meditate once and think like, oh, it doesn't work for me, or go to one yin yoga class and say, oh, I didn't like that, it didn't work. It's not going to work overnight. It's not going to happen in that way. It's going to be something where we need to teach your nervous system a different way of being. We need to teach it that actually it is safe and there is nowhere to run and there is nothing to do, and that you're valuable just because you are, because you exist, because there's only one of you in the whole world that exists. And so that in itself is so miraculous, actually. But we just get so stuck in our patterns and behaviors. So I would say, if you're really busy, if you're a perfectionist and an overachiever, something I see a lot, and I wonder who here will resonate, they go, oh yeah, I'm going to start doing self-care, and they write a to-do list of like 47 things that they have to do for their self-care, and then they become a perfectionist about their self-care. Don't do that. Don't do that, because it's going to make you anxious about your self-care practice. So then you're going to get all in a tizzy about that, right? So I would say pick like maximum 3 things that are really you feel like are achievable, that you feel interested in, that you could make a commitment to consistently and persistently over a period of time. And if you can do that, say for a period of 30 days, 60 days, then it becomes a habit, it becomes more habitual, and then you can introduce something else. And I would say try to vary it. So don't just, for some people we might say, okay, I'm in a journal, for example. Others might say, well, I'm going to start repeating affirmations to myself, or I'm going to start listening to a meditation, for example. Try, if you can, to mix it up so you're doing things that are both cognitive as well as things that address the nervous system and the body, because then you're taking a very holistic approach of both bottom up, and top down, and addressing the mind and the thoughts as well as the body and the sensations that are there. So try to really approach it holistically. So that could look like going for a half an hour, 15-minute walk every morning, or at least once a day, journaling at night, 5 things I'm grateful for, and then doing a guided relaxation breathwork meditation before bed. So I'm trying to target 3 different ways of me in order to really help my whole system say, hey, it's okay. It's okay for us to be here. Let's learn how to be here.
Yeah, and thank you for the illustration of the holistic approach as well, because I do think it's really important, and often where I see where people are stuck or previous support hasn't been as effective for them, there's usually a missing piece. And often I see that with working with the subconscious mind as well, because we need to get that on board, because again, very like in conjunction with the nervous system, again, it doesn't really care if you're happy, it cares about your safety. And it stores a lot of information about safety. So yeah, thank you for sharing those and being really specific about what those practices sound like, what they actually are, and that it is about that consistent nature of, I think it's about as well exposing yourself to that stillness and those types of practices, but in a small amount, a small way, whilst your body is getting used to tolerating it, because it doesn't initially feel safe. It doesn't mean that that's true, but you can build that up. So I know that you have, well, not just written a book, because you will have written it already, but it is due to be released.
I have it on my desk, actually.
Oh, huge congratulations for this moment in time, because I know that it is a long process. So that's incredible. So from writing your book, what is, there's so much in there, of course, but what's one key message you feel like people really, is really poignant, people really need to know?
God, I'm like, I don't know. There's so much. I mean, look, the book is about, it's called Good Enough, and it's a roadmap for compassionate self-acceptance. And so basically it takes the reader on a journey as if you were in my therapy room of, understanding exactly as we said before, like there's a 4-step process of awareness, becoming aware of the patterns, understanding how they developed, reconnecting to ourselves and finding things like values and all of this stuff again, and then taking aligned action. So then putting it into practice despite it being really hard. And I guess the biggest takeaway for me for people to know is that you're not good enough. Like, you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. And when we can really zoom out of our lives, which is what I intend to do with this book, is to help people just to see it almost like the Matrix. Like, see yourself as a puzzle, and there are many different pieces that fit together in that puzzle. And if we're stuck on one piece, or if we're like really, really like this, blinkers on, we don't realize and we don't see all the different things that have created that pattern or behavior, and we don't see all the possibilities out of that behavior. We just get stuck in it. So good enough is really to, like, I use case studies of, you know, clients of mine. I've integrated like journal questions and guided meditations and all different types of exercises that people can do, because I just want them to realize that, like, we're just, like, we really are, our lives really are just what we decide them to be, depending on how we see ourselves and how we see the world. And I know that sounds so simple, but it's often it's just the hardest thing. It is that simple, and it's the hardest thing to do. And so I guess I want people to just really understand that we live our lives through perceptions of ourselves and others, and we can change those perceptions. And if we know how to nurture our nervous system, and we know how it works, and we understand ourselves, then we can choose to cultivate peace, more peacefulness within us, which is, you know, what I think the world needs, is more peaceful humans.
Absolutely. And I think that so far there's already been a bit of a theme within some of the conversations in Recharge and Rise, and that there is a choice.
Yeah.
We can all experience different things in our life, different hardships, and we can choose to how we interpret those and what meaning we make to those, and that hugely has an impact on our life.
Yeah.
And sometimes I talk about that, you know, our lives might not change, but because we change, our life changes.
Yeah.
So even if the situation in itself doesn't change, actually the way that we view it or interpret or process that can be so different that we can have instant change as well in our lives. So thank you so much for bringing that as well. And what we'll do is, for your book, we'll put your link below, so that people, if they're interested in learning more about your book. Also, I'd love to invite you to share what your gift is for listeners as well. Thank you.
Sure. So I have put in a workbook, actually, and it's editable. So when you download it, you can edit it. And it's just a self-compassion workbook. So something that I often say to my clients and students is, like, we can know all the things. We can know what compassion means and self-compassion means, but it's a big difference between us knowing and us doing. And it's in the doing that we actually see change. So the workbook has a series of different exercises in it that are all founded around the notion of self-compassion. And you can literally just open the book, pick an exercise, navigate through it, answer the questions, and see what comes up for you and work through. I think it's about 30 pages. So you've got a good array of exercises to do, and to start to understand, how do you relate to yourself from a self-compassion perspective, and can we change the dialogue that we have with ourselves to become one that is more understanding and more validating and more supportive, rather than one that is shameful or critical or harsh. So that's something that you guys can work through at your own pace and see if you enjoy it.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that and reiterating, absolutely, especially when working with perfectionists and people that are very busy in the doing. There is often this trap of learning more and more information about the thing. So you might know about meditation, compassion, trauma, all of the different things, but unless an action is taken and something happens differently to what you were doing before, then there isn't any actual change. So thank you so much for that gift. I think it'll be really, really powerful. So that will be below. Are there any final reflections that or anything you want to share before we finish today?
I mean, all I would say on that is if you're like someone who's like a self-help junkie and you love like learning all the things, but you're not doing anything, the consequence of that is frustration. And just to become aware of that is that you end up getting frustrated with yourself because you know the things and you know what's possible, but you're not allowing yourself to experience it. So then you end up just getting internally frustrated with yourself. So if that is you, you can remedy that frustration by actually putting some things into action and realizing that you're actually capable of achieving these things.
Yeah, definitely. And also, that's a really good point about frustration. But the other point as well is around sometimes we need somebody else to hold that space and capacity for us to do that. So yes, you might know all of the things, and when I've experienced hardships in my life, sometimes I've already I was already a therapist, already knew all of the things, and when I went through trauma, I still needed somebody else to support me and hold that space. Absolutely.
And
And
that is compassion. So that is actually, sorry to cut you off, but just for the listeners, like that is compassion. Compassion actually derives from the Latin word compati, which means to suffer with. So the fact that you needed someone else to be in it with you is that you needed compassion, because maybe, in those times of hardship, we struggle to find it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting as well, like the permission that it gives you as well, having that space held. So, okay, so I'm going to bring our session to an end. Thank you so much for being here, for creating space for yourself and being with us. I hope that this conversation was as nourishing and wholesome for you as it was for us to share these. And just a reminder that if you want to connect further with Nikki and her free gift, then the links are below. And also you have access to my free gift as well, and my invitation to you, which is to join me in a masterclass experience around supporting, really going deep into root causes and shifting experience of anxiety and burnout. So again, thank you so much for being here. Nikki, I thank you as well for your time. Appreciate that her signal may have frozen in Bali. It just does that sometimes. But I will see you again on another conversation. But thank you for being here, and thank you again to Nikki for her time and energy. So goodbye for now.